Finding a big hole in your drywall isn't much fun, but fixing it isn't a big problem. I'm Jeff Wilson, and whether you've got a big hole to fix or you're just prepping to paint, you can fix most holes with just a few supplies and tools. Probably the most important thing would be to have a drywall knife or two, or a putty knife. Here's a 4-inch, 6-inch, and we've got a 10-inch too for larger repairs. If you are doing a larger repair and you want to have a place to put your joint compound, this is a mud pan, that's helpful. Various kinds of sandpaper. Here's a sanding sponge, sort of a fine grit. For bigger repairs, you might need some sanding screen and a holder for that as well. Now, if you are working on a bigger repair and you need to cut drywall, this is a drywall or keyhole saw, and that's helpful to have as well. All right, our first fix is really simple. It's just a divot, and we're just going to use a small drywall knife like this one and a little bit of spackle. Now, the first thing we want to do is just to make sure that our divots are cleaned out a little bit. Any loose material in there will get stuck in the spackle and it'll be difficult to get a nice smooth finish. So we're going to take our knife, get rid of some of that paper, anything loose in there. And if you've got a crack, you may actually want to enlarge the crack just slightly so it will accept enough of the spackle to make a nice bridge. That way you'll make sure that the crack doesn't reappear once the spackle dries. Now, the type of spackle we'll use here is this pink stuff. Comes in a small canister like this. It's pink now while it's wet, but it'll turn white when it dries, so you'll know when it's dry. And the process is pretty simple. Take a little bit of spackle on your knife, smear it into the hole, and then you want to make it as smooth as you can, but it's not critical to make it perfectly smooth, because we can come back later and do just a little bit of sanding. That'll smooth it right out. Now, with really small paint chips like this one, I'll usually just take a little bit of spackle on my finger, rub it on, and come back with a damp sponge and wipe it off. When that dries, it'll be ready to paint with no sanding at all. Now, on a bigger hole like this outlet that we've removed, you go about it in a similar way. First, you want to make sure that it's cleaned up and maybe sand the edges just a little bit. And then we're going to use a commercially available drywall patch. This is self-adhering. It's got a little bit of a metal screen that'll act as a reinforcement and hold the joint compound. This just peels right off of here and sticks in place. Then we're going to get some joint compound and put it into our pan. Now, because I've got a big enough hole here, I think I'm going to use my 10-inch knife to actually apply the joint compound. The bigger knife help you get a nice thin wide coat, and it'll help you do what's called feathering out. Get some mud here, get a nice coat on there. Now, as you apply this, some of it's going to be pressing into that patch. That's going to give a little bit. Start with it kind of thick. Use your pan to clean off the knife. You can go back and work on your patch. All right, well, we'll come back and sand down the high spots a little later when it's dry. Now, for a larger repair like this one, a patch won't do. We actually have to put in a new piece of drywall. And to do that, I've marked a 9 by 4.5 inch rectangle here. Our hole is sort of oddly shaped. It'd be difficult to cut a piece that would fit that. But if I cut it into a rectangle, then the piece that I cut can just be a simple rectangle that'll fit right in there. So I'm going to make this a nice even hole. All right. We've got our hole enlarged and to a nice even size. Now, on one side of our hole we've got a stud, so we can screw our patch piece right to the stud. On the other side though, there's no stud, so we're going to use this piece of blocking. Basically, to install the blocking, you put it inside the hole, hold it up against the back face of the old drywall, and run a couple screws into it. That'll give us something to screw our patch to. All right, so our patch is in, and you'll notice that it's inset just a little bit from the surface of the wall, and that's okay. What you don't want is a patch that sticks out from the wall. It's much easier to fill in with the mud than to try and level out something that's too high. Okay, we're going to use some of this dry joint compound this time. This is actually a type of joint compound that will set up in about 90 minutes. So we can get this patch on, we can get it to set up, we can sand it a little bit, and since we'll probably need a second coat, we'll go ahead and put a second coat on it. All right, one more step before we start mudding here. We're going to use some of this fiber reinforcing tape right around the edges of the patch. This will help keep cracks from developing later. It's self-adhesive, so it goes right on. I'm just going to get a rough first coat on. We'll come back and sand and get a nice finish coat on in a couple of hours. All right, our quick drying joint compound feels pretty dry and it's time to do a little sanding, but I'm pretty sure, based on some of these little divots and things, that we'll need to put another coat on here, and that's fairly common. With the smaller fixes, usually one coat, maybe two coats. With a larger patch like this, though, you can go to 2 or 3 coats before you get it just right, and that's all right, you can expect that. I'm just going to do a little sanding to smooth this out. Okay, well, we'll let this dry, hit it with a little sandpaper again, then it's time for paint. With a small fix, you can usually use a brush. With a larger fix, you want to break out the roller. You may even find that you need to paint a whole wall to make everything blend in. And to make the smoother finish of the new joint compound blend in with the bumpier finish of the old paint, use a heavy nap roller, and that'll usually take care of the problem. Okay. Our pink spackle is dried and turned white. Now we just need to sand it a bit to take down the high spots, and I've got this fine grit sanding block that'll do that for us. There you go, nice and smooth, a little bit of paint, and that'll be fixed right up. Well, as you can see, fixing holes in drywall is something anybody can do no matter how bad